Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining me for another segment of Conversations with Carmen. I am delighted to be joined by my colleague, Alex Rhodes. They are a licensed clinical social worker and also a fellow practice owner here at Soul Tenders. Good morning, Alex. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, Carmen. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're most welcome. Thank you. Thank you. All right, well, let's dive right in. I've got some pretty interesting questions to throw your way. I'm excited to kind of chat back and forth with you and to invite our audience into your world, a little bit into your professional world, and just to explore who you are and how you show up for clients. So let's dive right in.
All right.
All right. So you shared that you joined our Soul Tenders provider network in early 2021, I believe, subsequent to you having worked in community mental health. So I'm just wondering, what was that transition from community mental health to private practice like for you? And what were some of your key takeaways?
Well, it was a little bit difficult, I think, coming from community mental health and having so much structure and notes are due at a certain time and you have to see a certain number of clients. But I think I was ready to get back to more of the core of providing services and like connecting with clients versus all of the documentation and bureaucracy and paperwork. So, I mean, it was a little bit hard building up a caseload, I would say, at the beginning. But over time, I was able to have a good solid base of clients. And then I figured out that I needed a structure for myself of like, this is when I will schedule clients for, this is when I'm going to do my notes. And that helped to be able to have that work-life balance.
Great, wonderful. And as you started ramping up your practice and really being able to focus in and hone in on the clientele that either you were most interested in working with or gravitated most towards, did you ever have any experience where you felt, what's the word I'm looking for? Maybe like a little bit socially isolated? Because I know that, working in community mental health, no matter what type of program you're working in, I mean, at the heart of CMH is collaboration, partnering, teaming, right? And when we step into private practice, especially during 2021, when we were navigating COVID, it might have been even more isolating for you. So I'm just wondering, what was your experience with feeling connected to colleagues and peers?
Well, I think I have a pretty strong network of other social workers, other therapists. So, like some of my closest friends are also therapists in private practice. But I think also in the beginning with Soul Tenders, I leaned a lot on our weekly supervision, just to talk through, am I approaching this kind of am I taking everything into account? Am I like thinking of things? What is countertransference and what is like, a genuine like concern I need to bring up?
Okay, wonderful. That's great to hear. So it sounds like you had some really nice protective factors in place initially, which is great. That's great. Okay. All right. Another question I have for you. I remember during our initial conversation that you sort of piggybacking on having worked in community mental health for a while, you specifically worked with the unhoused population and the homeless population. I believe you provided therapeutic services as well as case management services. So I'm
Yes.
wondering, okay, so I'm wondering what were some of the takeaways from having worked with that population specifically?
Well, I think I worked with the chronically homeless. So the level of intensity, I would say, is definitely different than my typical like private practice clients. Um, but I think one of the main things that I took away from working with the homeless population is it really helped me hone the skill of just like being in the moment with someone and connecting with them where they're at. So I was on a field-based team. I was on FSP, and so we would go out and meet with the clients wherever they were, connect with them, meet the needs. Also, sometimes you go out there prepared to go to the DMV and the client isn't in a place where they can go on that day and you have to pivot. And so, like, okay, we're doing something different. So I think that like flexibility was one major takeaway and centering the client and their experience. Um, and then I think just, yeah, learning to connect across difference because I personally have never been homeless. I come from a pretty privileged background, so I don't know what it's like to experience that instability and to be just trying to figure out where am I sleeping tonight? Where will it be safe? Um, and so just I think I learned from a lot of work that I did in my master's program and in my undergrad. I learned theoretically, I guess, about like privilege and power and owning all of the privilege that I have, but it wasn't necessarily put into practice until I was sitting down next to somebody saying, I'm here. I know I don't understand, but can you explain it to me?
I love that. Theory versus practical application,
Mhm.
experiential, right?
Yeah.
Um, I love that. Okay. Yeah, I mean, obviously the textbook, the learning from our textbooks and being in classes and being in pods inside of classrooms and whatnot and having breakout discussion groups, all very important, very pertinent and relevant. At the same time, though, to your point, nothing beats being out there in the real world and being able to apply what you've learned. And, not even so much intellectually, but emotionally. And just like you
Mhm.
said, being in the moment with people. I absolutely love that. And for those of you who don't know or who aren't familiar with the FSP program, it's full service partnership. And so, as
Mhm.
Alex stated, it's about, being a part of an important part of a team, going out, wrapping around clients as, as much as possible, partnering with your peers and your colleagues and providing a full scope of services and resources to clients in need. And, as long as they're willing and receptive to the help. And it's intense work. I remember doing that myself. Um, Another thing that struck me about what you said was you threw out the word pivot and then connect, and that actually leads to my next question about you. Um, uh, you did share with me that one of your strengths, because I feel like I asked you initially when we spoke about like what are some of your strengths and attributes in terms of working with your clients, and I think you referenced your keen ability to connect very easily on pretty much any level with people. So I'd like to ask you if you feel like you can expand on that. I feel like you really addressed it in, when you answered this last question. I can see why, today you're able to connect so easily with people because in a previous, capacity that you were working, you were forced to, you were
Mhm.
challenged to, and it sounds like you rose to the occasion. But if you feel like you can expand a little bit more, I'd love to hear how you're able to connect with people. Um, yeah.
Okay. Um, well, I would say, let's see. I guess this also comes back to kind of my approach. I work with a lot of neurodivergent clients, and so I sometimes talk to people about things that don't seem super therapy related. But the client is really passionate about it, and that is important. That's information. So then I can talk to them about like, what do you love about this TV show? Why do you connect to this character? Like, what does it say to you? And then we can get more back into kind of the therapeutic work. Um, I think also I just tend to be a little bit like silly and goofy. So if people want to laugh, I'll laugh with them. Um, I can make jokes and kind of bring us to a level of like, we're not sitting here like teacher student or like I don't have all the knowledge. We're here together, kind of like similar to my past job, like sitting next to each other on the sidewalk. We're collaborating. What you have to say is just as important as what I have to say. And so going from that place of we're equal here, and I want to know what you have to contribute.
So, not only does taking that approach, forge that working relationship, but it also, I believe, it fosters and cultivates empathy and compassion and grace. And clients, no matter who they are, no matter what walk of life they're from, they can pick up on those things. And they know if you're showing up genuinely or in a, simulated fashion or a
Right.
contrived fashion, people can pick up on that. So I absolutely love that. For those viewers who aren't familiar with um, someone being neurodivergent, can you explain a little bit about what that is, what that means?
Okay. So we typically think, I mean, binaries are so but it's typically like neurodivergent versus neurotypical. In the same way that you would think about like with gender, cis people versus trans people. So your neurotypical person is kind of what you would expect. Like they don't struggle in the same way potentially, or they don't see things in a different way. People who are neurodivergent would be those who, like, according to the DSM, are somewhere along the autism spectrum, ADHD, things that like your brain maybe functions a little bit different or works in a different way. And so maybe we interact with the world differently.
Um, so intersectionality, what are your thoughts on intersectionality and how does that perhaps show up in your practice?
Um, I would say it's like integral to my practice, my approach, mostly how I try to live my life. Because so intersectionality is recognizing that we are not just defined by one identity, but by multiple identities that come together, and how, like, if you're oppressed or discriminated against on one identity, that can compound with other interlocking systems of oppression and make your experience that much deeper or different or worse. And so I guess I do a lot of identity work with people because many people come to me like trying to figure out gender stuff, trying to figure out coming out or sexuality. But my framework kind of takes into account, like, okay, yes, maybe you're questioning your gender. At the same time, what else is going on in your life? How do your other identities impact you? Because you're not just a cis person. You're also, like, for me, I'm trans and non-binary and queer and half Chinese and like the eldest child. So all of that informs my experience and how I see the world and how I interact with it.
Thank you. Thank you for that explanation. Yeah, that's really crucial. And I think it's super important to be as well educated as possible about not only the theoretical, if you will, definition of intersectionality, but just how it shows up in your clients and your ability to recognize and see how it may be showing up. And a lot of times, I think you might agree with this as providers, as clinicians, we see these things showing up in our clients sometimes before they do. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's our role to gently and compassionately point certain things out to them to make an observation and bring something to light. Thirdly, I think it's incredibly important and it's wonderful that you yourself You're very keenly aware of, how intersectionality plays out for you personally, historically and present day. So I think what I'm saying is, just the awareness on all different levels it's super important.
Mhm.
Super important. Yeah, thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I really would like to say I really credit like my undergrad and master's program in developing that awareness. Because, you know, I don't know, I was like a high schooler kid, didn't know much about my own privilege and got to college and I majored in women, gender, and sexuality studies. So right off the bat, we're having these conversations about, okay, where are you sitting at the table? Where do you come from? What are you doing or experiencing? Like, how do we understand other people's experiences when we are not experiencing them ourselves? And then in the master's program, I went to UCLA. It was deeply rooted in like social justice and racial justice and just I think that has impacted a lot of how I approach therapy just because I'm not trying to be like the typical stereotypical like therapist and client on the couch.
That's wonderful. I'm curious about that social justice, racial justice, women's studies background. How did you, in retrospect, how did you segue into clinical work, therapy, direct services? What was that pivotal moment, if you will, for you?
Well, I'm a therapist who goes to therapy. That's how I first even interacted with psychology. Um, I've been in therapy since college and I knew that I wanted to from my women and gender studies program. And then in my master's, I was actually kind of focused more on the policy and organizing side of, addressing racial justice, addressing social justice, gender inequality. But it took during my second year internship, I was an intern at DMH, Department of Mental Health, at their headquarters building um, with the Office of the Medical Director, which they have since restructured. But it was kind of like doing oversight of a bunch of clinical programs. And I realized from that 9 month, year-long experience that it was too removed for me from the the people aspect of it. Um, I just couldn't get into the work in the same way. And I had had that experience previously when I went into college. I was like, I'm going to be a scientist, I'm going to be a researcher,
Right.
I'm going to go get my PhD, I'm going to work in a wet lab. But then I was sitting in these classes and I was like, I cannot make myself memorize these like carbon molecules. I don't know why. It just doesn't seem important. And then I was in these labs, like working as an intern, and I'm like, turning the Western blot and stuff. And I cannot make myself care. It's just too removed. And so from that point, I pivoted and said, okay, I do want to focus. I was already doing a minor in women, gender, and sexuality studies. I said, I'm going to do a major in this and I'm going to see where this takes me because it seems so much more connected to the human, to the real, to the real experience. So that similar moment happened during my master's where I said, policy is great, but also the bureaucracy drains me. And I can also make such a big impact with clients one on one that I want to go in this direction at least for a little bit.
That's wonderful. And I must say that, from my perspective, it takes a good amount of self-awareness to even recognize that something is not a fit, whether it's a focus area or an industry or a part of an industry, it takes an immense amount of self-awareness, which it sounds like you've had for quite some time. Everyone has a different journey. I don't need to tell you that. Sometimes it takes
Yeah.
folks years to figure it out. Sometimes it takes people just a minute or two, and everyone else falls somewhere in between. But it sounds like you figured it out pretty quickly, and for every day that, you figured it out, that was, precious time that you were able to get out there and make an impression on the world, and on your on your clients that much more. So I don't, no time is wasted, but
Mhm.
at the same time though, man, how incredibly fortunate you were to really just kind of hit that ground running and move more towards your purpose. That's what it sounds like to me. So yeah,
Mhm.
thank you for that. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. When we last spoke, you also mentioned that when you worked with the chronically homeless population, you utilized a harm reduction approach. And I don't know if that's something that you even are able to use with some of your clients in private practice, but I'm wondering if you can just expand a bit on what the harm reduction approach is, how you utilized it, and is it relevant today, in terms of who you're working with now?
So the harm reduction approach, it comes more from like the substance abuse field. And it's kind of in opposition to an abstinence only approach, which is like, no, stop using things, nothing is cold turkey, which you would typically find in like your AA, NA. Um, it's not okay to use. Okay. So harm reduction is saying basically we recognize that sometimes in the substance use field, we recognize that people sometimes do need to use to cope, or that's the only way that they are able to get through the day. And so we try to find ways to reduce the harm. So reduce the use or switch to something that is less harmful to the body. And so I use that a lot with the homeless population because many of those people, you know, they're in fight or flight mode. And so sometimes using substances is the only way to like relax or get out of it. And so I used it a lot with the population there and saying, like, okay, I get that some days you needed to use, but like if I show up and you let me know that you used meth today, we need to reschedule because I want to talk to you when you are fully here. Um, and that's all we're going to do. So let's try to like plan. And maybe we can say, why don't we think about using a different, like, let's go to marijuana, something different. Um, so that was pretty heavily used. I mean, also I mentioned before, not in the substance use context, just showing up and recognizing where the person is at. Like if we had an appointment to go to the DMV and you are not in a place currently where you can go, we're not going to penalize you. You're not going to be punished for this. We're going to say, okay, today, here's what we're able to do. And we will do something different or do the DMV later. Um, and I think in my current work, I use a harm reduction approach mostly in that a lot of the clients that I work with have suicidal thoughts or self-harm. So I use the approach in that way of saying, I want to know what you're going through. I know that sometimes people will cut or pinch themselves because that's the only way to escape certain thoughts in that moment. And that's what it feels like. That's the only way. So we're going to work on giving you other less harmful coping skills that we can think about using instead in the future. but never like making someone give up a coping skill or like immediately stop because we've all developed ways of coping that were accessible to us in that moment.
Makes such sense. That makes a lot of sense. So it really is about joining them, meeting that client where they are, offering respect, allowing them to preserve and hold on to their dignity as a human being, not ripping that away from them, not implying or insinuating that they're less than,
Mhm.
or that they're being judged or degraded. But all the while combining that with grace and understanding and support
Mhm.
and healing that takes place for the most part on their terms. That's what I'm hearing.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I love that. That's wonderful. Thank you. Alex, for this next question, I'm going to quote you directly.
Okay.
And I feel like this, what we just talked about in terms of the harm reduction approach, it really nicely segues into a little snippet of a quote that I took from our last conversation. So you referenced when we spoke last that your overarching approach to therapy with your clients is quote unquote normalizing for them that we use the coping skills accessible to us. So this may be redundant. I feel like you totally addressed this just a hot second ago. But is there anything else that you're willing to elaborate on, just in the spirit of that? We normalize for clients that we use the coping skills that are accessible to us. Anything else to say about that?
Well, I guess on a personal level, like uh I know that I personally dissociated a lot growing up. And then I had a lot of shame about that once I realized that was how I got through 18 years of my life. And so I think from being in the client spot, working with a therapist, it was so important to be able to say, like, I can let go of that shame that I coped in that certain way, because no one's putting that on myself but me. Um, and so I think I just really take that approach with clients to say, don't be mad at yourself. Try not to be mad at yourself for how you coped in the past. Right now, you're in therapy. We're trying to do something different. That in itself is a big step.
Yeah, wonderful. So normalizing the human experience for people, using yourself as context because you're just as human as the next person. And I definitely utilize and have the same perspective and in terms of working with my clients. And, another thing that I will typically share with people is that were it not for XYZ coping skills back in the day, even if you're not necessarily the most proud of them in this moment, they
Mhm.
helped you, to your point, get through whatever you were navigating. And it's part of the journey. Were it not for how you showed up previously, you wouldn't be showing up this way today. Powerfully, more, more healthy, more driven, more positive, more proactive. Sometimes we have to fall and stumble a bit. Sometimes we have to take detours in order to get to where we are today. And I notice that when I say that to clients, and the overwhelming majority of them really are able to take it in and resonate
Mhm.
with it, or at least let it marinate for a minute or two,
Yeah.
and then decide, okay, I don't know if I really, I don't know, I'll either filter this out or I'll keep it. And for a lot of people, I think it's a really helpful way of conceptualizing, where they are
Mhm.
today. You had to be here in order to get here.
Right.
So, okay. All right. I love that.
And it can be so diametrically opposed to how we're taught to think about life and journeys, and you do A, then B, then C, and we
Absolutely.
keep going upward. But life is not like that. And it may take trying something and realizing that it's not for you to then find like your true calling, or even some people, like, their career is not what they're here on this earth to do. Their meaning in life is like their relationships or their family. Other people, it's creativity, it's art, it's, like producing just that ingenuity. And so I think I also try to work with clients of say, like, get off that train track that tells you you're supposed to do this. Like, what matters to you, and let's go from there.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I will often say to my clients, so much of life is not linear. You may think it is, or you may have been, to your point, taught that it was. That may have been part of the family culture that you grew up in. First you do this, then you're expected to do that, and then what's going to happen after that is this, and so much of life is not linear. And I think that that's what leads a lot of us to struggle with the gray area, if you will, because so much of life, while so much of life is not linear, so much of life is very gray and ambiguous. And I think that's why people struggle with finding the middle. It's hard for a lot of us to tolerate the middle because we've been just conditioned, if you will, to just think very, and like you said, to be plotted along that upward trajectory. And if something happens not to, play out sequentially, it inspires a lot of anxiety for folks. Okay, so all right, Alex, this has been such a wonderful, wonderful conversation with you. I'm gonna throw my last question of the day at you, and it's pretty much open-ended. Is there anything that I have not inquired about yet that you would like us to know about you?
Uh, let's see. I think more of the kind of human side of things. As you can tell, I'm kind of a maximalist, not a minimalist, very into space. This actually it goes back to kind of what you were saying about the gray and the ambiguity. I guess for me, like, a lot of how I live my life is in the ambiguity, in the sense that we don't know what's going to happen. Anything can happen. And so that in my brain connects a lot to like outer space, and that like we don't know what's out there. Um, and so anything can be. So I have like some space posters here. This is Godzilla and King Kong. Just I really like seeing, and I resonate with um examples or art or stories that push people to think beyond what is conscripted, and what is written out or laid out on the path. And so I think that's just one important part of how my brain works, is like uncertainty, rather than causing anxiety for me, it gives me a sense of calm and peace, because it means that there are a million possibilities of what could happen next versus being stuck in like A or B.
Phenomenal. I love that. I love that. Ooh. There are 10 questions that I could have asked based on that, but I know we're out of time. I love that. I love that. Well, listen, we've come to the end of our conversation, but once again, thank you so much for joining me. I have really enjoyed this conversation with you, this exchange, and I'm sure our viewers will love it as well. You are phenomenal at what you do. You are amazing. I am honored to have shared this time with you. And as we close out, Alex, what is a good contact email address for you in case any of our viewers or colleagues want to reach out to you for clarification, questions, whatever the case may be, maybe offer your Soul Tenders email address?
Sure. Yeah, my Soul Tenders email address is arhodes, so ARHODES, my last name, .ip @soultenders.com.
And my email address, should you guys have any questions for me, is cmajid, CMAJIED.IP @soultenders.com. And if anyone has questions or would like to inquire about conversations with Carmen or about the monthly provider spotlight, feel free to email provider relations directly at providerrelations@soultenders.com. Well, Alex, thank you once again. Appreciate your time and the space that we shared together this morning. And I wish you well.
Thank you, Carmen.
Thank you, Alex. Take care.